Let's go ahead and take a look at edge indicating lines, contour lines. Contour line is similar to an outline, a line that surrounds the outside edge of an object. Contours vary in thickness and darkness. They also define edges of shapes within the object, and they give a greater sense of depth and space to the object. And here you can see examples of that. See how these lines are getting thicker and thinner? It's showing information inside as well as exterior edges. Contour line drawing uses line to indicate edges. Contour drawing is essentially edge drawing. Contour lines are lines which indicate edges of objects and their details, and sometimes even their light sources. If we look at this, you can actually see there almost seems to be a light source here because they're making the lines lighter that are going over this area. Look at these wrinkles and how heavy and dark those lines are in places. We really feel like that pillow is bending. And here, we're even seeing the reflection of the glass here. And we can see the edge where a lot of light and shadow is being caught. In drawing, we use lines to describe edges in three-dimensional objects, and those are all called contour lines. But there are many different types of contour lines. There are exterior contour lines, interior contour lines, major and minor contour lines. Exterior contour lines are contours which show the outside edge or the outline of the objects, like this is right here. So it's very much like the outline itself, meaning that it surrounds the outside edge of an object. This is primarily an exterior contour drawing, but it does have some interior drawing too. Normally you wouldn't see these or where it's crossing over in a situation where you're actually doing an edge indicating. Interior contours are contour lines which show interior edges and information of objects inside the outline. So here we have the outline like we had before, and you can see there's no crossover where this is bending over this other area. But once you start to do the interior contours, you do see that bend. You start to see a lot more detail and powerful edges that you see on the inside of the object as well. Notice that we're seeing the front edge of this vase now. Major contour lines are those lines which show the most important information to describe the object. So you will have a lot of interior contour lines which are major, because this is actually dimensionally ridged. And here you have that extra ridge showing that this has a certain thickness. All of that is still major contours. The texture here, all of those are major. You can see all these major contours in here. Where her hair is, we're starting to get some minor contours. And in the leaf and flower back here. Let's take a look at what minor contours are. Minor contour lines are those lines that are usually used to describe the minute detail, such as reflection, light, shadow, things like that in your objects. So here you can see they have some minor contours that are showing kind of the warbly reflected shadow or highlight that's on this hammer. And the same with here and here. Do you see these weird little shapes? That's pretty indicative of metal. Metal loves those little square shapes. I don't know why. So those are the minor contours. Now, you can use a lot of different kinds of lines and weight and stuff like that when you do your contour lines, and that makes a different effect. So I want you to notice in here where you have some thicker and thinner lines in here, but I want you to specifically notice this whole area right here. Do you see how there's more thick lines here, and it feels physically closer to us, mostly because of these lines, and also because it's lower on the picture plane and this is coming towards us. But this use of heavy, thick lines is really making this stand out. So squint your eyes and kind of sit back a little bit, and you'll feel like this bottom half is much closer to you physically. So the smaller the lines are, they go back in space, the more dimensional you could make your drawing feel. So you can use proximity, which means closeness of lines in relationship to one another, width, which means the thickness or the thinness of the lines, and value, which is talking about the relative lightness and darkness of lines. It's harder to do value in, say, marker. But in pencil, you have a variety of different leads, and those different leads allow you to do different thicknesses. But this is all done in marker, and you can see that you can also use thinner markers to make these kind of more thin, and we feel like this is like reflections that you're seeing or seeing through this clear bucket to things that are on the other side of it. You're definitely seeing a bunch of those thinner lines like here and here, which is highlights and reflections and cast shadows. And they're in here too, and here. Lines that vary gradually in a tapering way in width and thickness and thinness, like this, see how it's thin and then becomes thicker and then thin again, are called calligraphic lines. And those lines have a tendency to create a feeling of dimension as well, because the wider and thicker that something is, the closer it feels to you, and the thinner and lighter it is as it goes back in space, the further away it feels from you. So you can actually use that based on what you're seeing in your drawing, in your objects. You'll notice that there will be some areas where you feel like a heavier line should be there because there's a noticeable edge. So you'll push some of that envelope just a little bit to create some of these really beautiful gradual changes that creates what we call sensitivity to your line. This is what good tattoo artists do. Using calligraphic lines creates controlled elegance in the quality of the lines and has a tendency to make your image just a little bit more dimensional. Look how flat this bird looks on the left compared to how much more physical, like turning back and forth, this one is because of the calligraphic lines. So in these pictures, you can see this is primarily flat line. There's not a lot of, variation thicker to thin, but here you're seeing thicker to thin, thicker to thin, thicker to thin, thicker to thin in here, and you can see this image really draws your eye in comparison to this image. So notice that this heavy knee right here is super dark but getting really tapered and thin as it goes back. So anytime you see these calligraphic lines like this, it creates much more dimension and space. The same thing is happening here in these shell drawings. They're starting to have something else happen though, which is called cross-contouring, and we'll talk about in a later video. It also had an implied line, and implied lines are lines that start and stop. So if we look here in this dice right here, do you see how there's some dashed lines, but our eye kind of knows that this all goes together? And the same with this one here. If you squint your eyes, you can actually see right here. It's fairly hard to see that shape change here. So barely showing that in this dice here. So definitely you have starting and stopping, but your eye will still continue that edge shape. And that's called implied line. You see a ton of implied line on your dollar bill if you look closely. Here you see it kind of almost disappears completely right here and then comes back on this edge. Alright, so those are the different types of contour lines and lines that we're going to be using in the class. I'll see you next time.